Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Finance Budget Workshop number 1 for Thursday, March 10th, 2022. We have 3 items on the agenda. Before I go into those, I want to wish everyone a good evening. Before we begin our formal agenda, I want to take a moment to provide some introduction to tonight's proceedings and the structure. I have some scripted comments here, but one is a little bit off script. We are going to be missing this evening one of our Board of Finance members. Mr. Trotta is not able to join us tonight. He has had a medical emergency in his family, and he is on a flight headed to his family member. Very, disappointing to hear and sad. But that being said, he is at no short. He was not short in texting me questions for the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen. He kept me very busy in the last hour printing off his questions. So he did want to be represented, and I told him absolutely that would be fine. I will ask, I will make the comments and ask the questions as he present them to me. I will do the best I can to make a synopsis of it, but I do want to make sure his comments and his questions are captured. If there's an embedded question, I encourage Dr. Freeman, Dr. Balistraci, and Mr. Hoey to chime in to make a comment or answer a question, because some of them are questions embedded in comments, so it'll be hard to identify both when I just got these about an hour ago. So that being said, tonight, as we do at all of our regular meetings, we will begin and end with public forum. In between the public forums will be the one agenda item for our meeting is to consider and take possible action on the proposed fiscal year 2022-2023 budget. During our Tuesday night public budget hearing, there were presentations on the town budget from First Selectman Matt Hoey, and the Board of Education budget from Dr. Freeman and Dr. Balistraci. We also offered the opportunity for the public to ask questions of the town and school leaders and provide comments at the end with public forum. I just want to be clear, the public may make comments during public forum this evening, but as this is a board workshop, there will only be questions and dialogue expected between Board of Finance members and town and Board of Education members and leaders. As we are in a virtual meeting setting this year, you may have noticed, I believe that everyone should be muted to limit any unintended distractions. When I do open up public forum in a moment, we will individually unmute those who wish to make a 3-minute comment, but ask the members of the public, should they want to speak, use the raise hand function to identify themselves. I would like to note for record that the Board of Finance through the town website has not received any written correspondence regarding the budget as of 5 p.m. this evening, so I will not be reading anything into record as I had done in the last couple of years, actually. At this time, I'd like to go on to item number 1 on our agenda, public forum. I would like to ask anyone wishing to address the Board of Finance to raise your virtual hand or wave vigorously into the camera, and we will unmute you and state your name, address, and please try to limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes. Anybody wishing to address the Board of Finance? I'll give it a second. Going once. Going twice. Okay, seeing no public forum, I'd like to go on to item number 2 on our agenda, discuss and take possible action on the proposed fiscal year 2022-23 budget. As I did at the conclusion of, or near the conclusion of our last meeting, I did a recap for everybody watching, listening in. I would like to do that again, a little bit less information than I did before, but nonetheless, I think it's important to again set the stage for our workshop. Most of the people on this particular meeting know of these numbers, but for the public viewing, they should be recapped. The Town Board of Selectmen budget. They have requested an operating budget of $34,018,909, or a 5.15% increase over last year. The town debt service budget request of $10,264,901 is a 1.5% decrease from last year. On the Board of Education side, they have requested an operating budget of $65,629,734, which is equal to a 5.18% increase over last year. The total budget increase requested by the town in total is $109,913,544, or a 4.51% increase over last fiscal year. On the revenue side, projected non-tax revenue will increase, or is expected to increase, $774,657, or a 12.5% increase. And this is largely due to increases in building permits, town clerk revenue, and state grant money. Regarding the Grantless increase stated on Tuesday night, there has been a slight adjustment down in the percentage increase. It's still the largest increase, as far as I know, this town has seen in many, many years. But the previous 2.23% increase was based on, I was informed this afternoon from our finance director, was based on a 3-year average, which the numbers are before the Board of Assessment appeals. And that was an estimated reduction of approximately $637,000 that was included in that calculation. Numbers from the Board of Assessment Appeals was approved. I believe it was yesterday. That's when the tax assessor sent out a memo indicating the actual amount of the reduction in the Grantless would be $979,000, and now would reflect a grand list percentage increase of 2.18%. And Mary Jane, please feel free to correct me at any given time, which you're about to do. Thank you. Go ahead, Mary Jane.
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but the difference was the 900,000. The total was 1 point something, and the difference is the 900,000 number.
Thank you. So I can. It's fine. So the 970. So just for math purposes, if anyone wants to get a calculator, it's the 979 plus the 637 is the amount of decrease. And actually, that is absolutely correct, because I remember when the Board of Finance does, the members do have a snapshot PDF of that sheet. It has been shared before, but it's the PDF version. So when I got that, I did send in, it does reflect that number of the 1.5 decrease, or thereabouts. It's actually more like 1.6 million, I think, in the decrease in the grant list. This will still result in a mill rate increase under 2%. With that new Grantless figure, the projected mill rate tax increase would go from 32 point, the mill rate would be 32.62, go to 33.25, or a 1.94% increase over last year. As a reminder, the mill rate tax increase was under 1% the last 2 years, 0.87 in fiscal year 2021, 0.95 in fiscal year 21-22. Moving on to the bonded capital projects, project requests. The Board of Education is requesting an amount of $3,885,391. There will also be a bond request by the town to basically replenish the land acquisition fund of $10 million for future open space purchases. I did add that based on Tuesday night, what we heard from our first selectman, that will be a question that will be expected to be put on the referendum. As far as the bonded capital projects, obviously the town land acquisition fund is self-explanatory. The 6 projects that are part of the Board of Ed, I will recap those later on when we go to motion. As we all know, the backup documents that I've just summarized from are all found on our board pack. So we have all the information. And with that recap of where we stand, I do want to make sure that we get ample time to ask questions of the town and the Board of Education regarding their budgets and capital bonding requests. Why don't we start tonight with the Board of Selectmen. First Selectman Hoey about their requested budget, capital bonding requests. I will open that up to anyone on the Board of Finance. As I mentioned, I do have some questions from our colleague who is not able to be with us tonight. But if anybody wants to start that off, please feel free to do so.
Mr. Chairman, did you say you wanted questions for the town budget or the Board of Education?
Town budget first.
Okay,
We will give the town the first dibs tonight as opposed to
Okay,
the night.
I'll lower my hand.
And we'll do Board of Education second. Should I, if any, oh, Amy, go ahead. Just saw you pop up. Go ahead. Hold on. You got it? You're
Am I unmuted?
Okay.
Yeah.
You're good.
All right, this is my first go at this, so let me see how I do. Several kind of short questions, I guess. In the capital request, there are a number of vehicles, and in the capital presentations, there was a lot of talk about availability, and I wondered if you had any idea of the how reasonable it is to expect that all of the vehicles are going to be available within the budget year that you're requesting them for.
Amy, that's a great question. We quite honestly, we don't know. One of the things that, and I had this conversation with a couple of departments that unlike previous last couple of years where there has been some supply chain issues as well, we should, as soon as the budget is approved by our voters at referendum, assuming these items survive, that we would start placing orders for those immediately. A personal anecdote, I have a brother of mine is trying to buy, has placed an order for a Ford pickup truck, and he placed that order 3 months ago. He still has no idea when he's going to get it. So even if the allocation, of vehicles is not available, and remember, we are now talking about a 15-month or 16-month window here, because we will have the opportunity to expend those funds up until June of 2023. So it's a good question, Amy. Quite honestly, we don't know the answer, but we will try to take steps to make sure we take all reasonable efforts to get orders in as soon as we can.
Thank you. My next question is, there's on the revenue side, a 24% increase in the personal property tax. And I didn't ever hear what accounts for that. Is that a?
There's a couple of things that account for that. The number one is a stepped up, not enforcement, but a program by our assessor's office to ensure that we are getting all of our personal property reports in from our businesses in town. And that was one effort that has taken place. We also had some spot, we occasionally use some spot audits. We hire a company that goes in and evaluates 10 to 15 businesses who are responding with the personal property tax audit to ensure that they're in compliance. So there have been a couple of those efforts over the last couple of years resulting in some of these increases. Mary Jane, you may have more, or I don't think Jen is on the line at this point. I don't see her.
So it should be a sustainable increase. It's not like a one-time increase kind of thing.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah, because we don't accommodate any kind of depreciation allowance for equipment. So.
Okay. at the Tuesday night meeting, you mentioned under the planning and zoning that there was, I don't know how you exactly worded it, but like an opportunity to change up the way that the planning and enforcing is done. And I was wondering if you could speak to that briefly.
Yes, we've had some difficulties attracting a zoning enforcement officer. Mitch can, could attest to that. We've actually hired 2 to replace our previous zoning enforcement officer who left to go to Madison as a town planner. I believe, what was that, last August or September? So we had actually hired 2 in the interim, both of which decided not to take the jobs after having accepted them. So we have some challenges there. One of the issues is that a standalone job, or is there an opportunity for us to recraft that position or recast that position to something of sustainability management and zoning enforcement, assistant town planner / zoning enforcement officer. So we had, as you are probably familiar, George Kroll took his retirement. George had been here for 30 some odd years, and George's salary was at the top end of my department heads. We were fortunate enough to replace George with Jamie Stein, who I think is maybe on this call, and we were able to exact some savings on her salary over what George was getting. But there's an opportunity for us to redeploy some of those funds in increasing the salary on the zoning enforcement officer.
Okay. Thank you. And last question on the land acquisition bond. You mentioned again that like the vehicles, you don't have a crystal ball, but that there are some opportunities that are kind of already in the works. Do you have any sort of time frame estimates for when some of that money might be spent if that's approved?
Amy, that's a great question. And again, without disclosing the properties, the Board of Selectmen we were given access to a target list of properties and potential properties, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, was in excess of $40 million worth of properties at today's land valuations. There are a couple of properties that if that are highly targeted, highly valued properties, that if they become available, we want to be prepared to act on. So while we don't have specific properties in mind, well, we do. We have properties in mind, but we don't have any highly targeted ones right now in terms of availability. But what this does is it gives us the opportunity to negotiate in good faith, because they know that we will have the money to do so. But the more important part is we don't actually bond for this until such time as we need the funds. It's not a blank check where we're going to the market in August and say, give us $10 million so we can have it in the bank ready to spend. There are some laws around arbitrage. You cannot issue municipal bonds, tax-free municipal bonds, and then take the proceeds from that, put them in the bank, and earn interest on them while they sit there. So, and I just want to one other point that I want to make relative to that initiative. Just like the first go around 22 years ago, and we're just at the end of exhausting that $5 million, there's a very definitive process in place before we actually authorize the spending of any of that now $10 million. And that is land acquisition has to make a recommendation. We do an appraisal on the property. It goes to the Board of Selectmen. Board of Selectmen gives land acquisition the range within which they are able to negotiate on price. Once that happens, it comes back to the Board of Selectmen for approval. We have to go to town meeting to get it approved. But then your board also has the opportunity to say yes or no before we can actually execute the contract and purchase the property. So there are a significant number of steps involved.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Amy. Anyone else on the board? Veronica.
I'm not sure it's related to this budget season, but during the course of our meetings, we talked about fuel and that we had gone out to bid. So my question is, when do we have to go out for bid on fuel again? And given the recent rise in fuel and heating and in diesel, are we on the right side of it right now?
Veronica, if you had asked this question
I did.
in November, I
I
would have
did.
said we were on the wrong side of it because we did our fuel bid, our combined fuel bid with the Board of Education in the November timeframe. And even at that point, the rates were higher than what we had the previous November, which are currently in effect on our current budget. So I think during some of the workshops, we had identified that fuel costs had gone up, and it was 20 to 30 cents a gallon for diesel, regular fuel, and heating oil as well. So like I said, 3 months ago, I wasn't very happy about the numbers that had come in, but right now with gasoline at $4.50 a gallon, I'm very happy that we have prices locked in starting July 1 through June 30th of 23. We are
Okay, so it
currently
is.
currently in a contract that we signed last year that they still have to honor. So the prices that we had negotiated in November of 20 are still in effect.
So the fuel estimates that the department heads were given are solid, I guess is my.
Mary Jane, you want to talk to that maybe?
Yes, so all the department heads are provided fuel usage from my department, and they do use that as a guide on how to budget for the upcoming year. So they take an estimate of what their past usage is and multiply it by what we budget for, and that's what they put in the budget. So assuming that we don't have any major storms or emergencies that require us to use a lot more gallons than we've budgeted for and that we've contracted for, our budget should be fine.
Thank you.
I'll take a question while, Jeff, did you come off?
No, go ahead. I'll go after you, Mike.
Okay. I had two questions. One specifically that I know the answer of, but I still want to just confirm it. The medical, the insurance we've talked a lot about, you have all talked about a lot. There was the lasering issue. That lasering issue is my understanding correctly, I hope, that was taken off the table. And that was based on, I believe, Anthem being approached again with the particular issue of lasering. So we are not having to deal with that in this budget. Had it been needed, though, it would have been something of the range of over $500,000, somewhere in there. But right now, that is not on the table, and Anthem has taken that process or that procedure off. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I'll let Mary Jane and talk to this, and possibly Linda talk to this, as well as Mitch. But yes, as a result of us preparing to go out to bid, Anthem came back and reduced the rate on the stop loss, so we did not have to exercise our own lasering. And I want to be clear, we were doing our own lasering by identifying 2 high exposure cases. And we were going to potentially absorb the cost between this traditional stop loss at 150 and the cap on stop loss at 450. So our exposure at the time that we first were presenting budgets to you was a potential of $600,000. And that $600,000, if realized, if those costs were realized, would come from the surplus in the medical account. Based on what Joe Spurgeon has been able to do in negotiating with Anthem, that liability, that potential liability, as I understand it, again, Mary Jane or Linda or Mitch can correct me here, I think our maximum exposure is somewhere around $60,000 at this point. Any of my colleagues want to comment?
I can try, Matt. Joe Spurgeon did on our request, your request, go back to Anthem and let them know that we were dissatisfied with the lasering process, and also wanted to see what they could do to help us because we were very concerned about the increase. So I'm going to read to you directly from Joe after his discussions with Anthem as to what the impact of this is. And it may sound a little confusing, but I think it backs up what Matt just said. By removing the lasers, which is what we've agreed to, stops the loss premium rate, which the stop loss premium rate, excuse me, the stop loss premium rate would increase now by 19%. That is down from 45.6%. Stop loss then decreases by $527,000. This eliminates the need for the reserve to absorb the additional $300,000 for lasered member. In other words, $600,000. This would technically be an increase in the budget by about $60,000, but you avoid the $600,000 member exposure. So that, I know it sounds convoluted, but in the long run, it was felt to be, by discussions with myself, Mary Jane, Linda, Matt, and Paul Freeman, that this was a much more prudent way of going forward. It was going to save us some money. There is some exposure, obviously, as Matt said, but I think it's going to be best for us in the long run. And as we mentioned before, I think Matt mentioned the other night, we are definitely going to take a very strong look at looking at the marketplace in the next fiscal year. There are some concerns about the rising costs of our medical regardless.
I just want to be clear. I asked the question for two reasons. One, the insurance situation could have been a lot worse.
Absolutely.
We could have been, it would have been a $600,000 impact that we'd have to absorb. So it could have been worse. So as much as we are kind of complaining about this, which as we should, it could have been worse. And the other reason I brought it up is because Tracy, I believe it was today, shared the medical presentation that Joe Spurgeon did for the Board of Education and Board of Finance joint meeting. I know that was reflective of that meeting when lasering was still an issue. So I just wanted to be clear for anybody who got it or saw it, that the lasering was taken out and to our advantage. And I appreciate that explanation. It does make sense after everything we've heard. So I don't know if anybody else.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just a minute. If anybody ever, I don't mean to sound like threatening, but if anybody questions the value of our insurance consultant, this is the greatest evidence of how valuable that resource is for us to work through a very complex industry and set of circumstances. So Joe Spurgeon has done a tremendous job for us, and most likely he would have been here tonight if we had asked him to do that, to answer any questions. So,
yeah, thank you. My second question has to do with on the revenue side. We did have some fortune in the state grants and having a better impact. Last year, I remember we were actually talking about a decrease by quite a bit in the non-tax revenue. This year, it's greater. I'm just asking the question because I'm sure the public would ask, do we have any reason to believe that some of the grants from the state may not be realized? I know there's always maybe a possibility, but I don't want to say how accurate the numbers are because I'm sure they're accurate, but is there any jeopardization that we think could happen where those grants may not be realized, or are they pretty certain? And I guess it's more of a question for our finance director, unless Matt, you want to take that.
Let me take it, and then I'll let Mary Jane fill in. Understanding that there's a legislative process to the allocation of funding from the state, and is always subject to the whims and the different winds that are blowing through the Capitol building. But I personally reached out to the Speaker of the House, who conveniently happens to be our bond counsel, to verify the numbers that we have presented to you. And he said, yeah, if it was my budget, I'd be comfortable presenting them to you. There are a couple of components. The ECS formula grant, which I think I have mentioned on numerous occasions, based on legislation that was passed 2 years ago or 3 years ago, is scheduled to continue to erode for communities like Guilford with a wealth profile index that we have. That is not happening. The biennial budget basically said, no, we're going to keep these. We're not going to implement those the changes to the ECS formulas. So those numbers, from everything I understand and I've been told, are valid. The other one, there was some concern about the Municipal Revenue Sharing Act and whether or not that was going to be realized. I specifically asked that question of leadership, and I was told, no, you can assume that that money is going to be there. So to the extent that the Speaker of the House has the ability, or has given me the comfortability to say this is what we should budget for, I think we're in pretty good shape.
Great, thank you. Answer works for me. I know I have Mr. Trotta's questions as well. So does anybody else want to go, or we'll take a little take a little break? I'll ask Mr. Trotta's and we'll go on from there. Jeff, oh, I'm sorry, Jeff. You said you were going to follow me. You're right. Go ahead.
That's
Follow
fine.
you.
So this is just, I think, maybe directed to Chief Hirschafter, Deputy Chief Shove. I was happy to see that there were increases in the overtime and replacement salaries in their proposed budget this year. That's always been a source of some variance, and largely it's because of circumstances outside their control. But I was wondering, I thought this might be a good opportunity for members of the public if they could just briefly explain the difference between replacement salaries and overtime, so that people watching this can understand why there are increases and why the increases are what they are based on, I'm assuming, based on past experience. So if either one of them wanted to answer that, that'd be great. Or Matt, if you wanted to handle that, whatever you think is appropriate.
Thanks, Jeff, but I'm going to defer to the experts on this one.
Chief, you want me to take that?
Yeah, Mike.
All right. I apologize. I'm not on video. I'm on audio only. But so some of the biggest contributing factors, the difference in the two accounts is replacement salary is the straight time portion, and overtime is the halftime portion based on the FLSA, the way we pay. So the fire department does not pay time and a half until a member actually gets to 212 hours over a 28-day cycle. So it basically allows, it allows us to pay straight time for those additional 44 hours almost once a month. So that's kind of the difference of the two accounts and how they're managed. So the overtime account actually accounts for the halftime portion when a firefighter is at above 44 hours or time and a half. So a couple of the biggest contributing factors to those is, which has been discussed, is the elimination or no longer additional SAFER money from the federal government for the additional staffing hired a couple of years ago. This is the last year. And then also contractual wages. We were able to offset some of this year's account working with Mary Jane in finance to add some additional ARPA funding. So we've looked at sick time use over the last 5 years. And obviously after the last 2 years of sick time, where we've had people out for longer periods of time based on the CDC guidance. For example, they were put out for 10 days at a time. We used the ARPA funding to help offset some of those things to kind of keep those accounts as best we can not affected by COVID. So I think that kind of summarizes the biggest impacts or how those accounts work.
Great, thank you. And if you just explain, so overtime, that kicks in when someone's out on a call and they're out beyond their shift, whereas replacement salaries, if someone's getting trained and you need someone else to come in, that's my understanding of it. You correct me if I'm wrong, but
that's some of it. Yes. So so if we're out on a call or there's back-to-back calls and somebody has to come back, during a large fire or a large emergency, or that's what potentially could trigger time and a half. But also it can be, if somebody hits above the 212 in 1-month period or 28-day cycle. So there's two pieces to that equation and overtime.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
While we're on fire and Michael is still off mute or still active, there was a question. There was a question that Mr. Trotta had regarding the fire department, and it was operating supplies. He had indicated the line is up 9% or $16,000. Are any expenses attributable to COVID that may qualify for ARP funding?
It's a great question. One of our primary focuses with ARPA was initially on salary with Mary Jane. We're still looking through operating supplies, obviously with everything right now, supply chain issues, and we looked at a 4-year average of the budget numbers for the last 4 years with operating supplies. And again, the biggest challenge is trying to predict of what we're actually going to pay for everything over next year's budget. We are looking within that to try and attribute anything to COVID to potentially offset it. The hard part is digging down, looking, at a granular level of what potentially is related to COVID and what's not related to COVID. But anything that we can articulate to, our potential ARPA funding, we will send forward to finance to look to offset those accounts any way we can.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Tell you what, while I have his questions right in front of me, there's two regarding technology and IT and one regarding printing. So I'll read the technology-based ones first, or actually it's cyber insurance is the first one. Mr. Trotta had also a concern on the Board of Ed side. So this question is somewhat similar. So I'm giving Dr. Balistraci and Dr. Freeman some heads up on that. Concerns about cyber insurance on the town side being worth what is worthwhile given the premiums. Maybe shoring up our backups and I know he's in technology and you put an abbreviation here. Our backups and DR might be more cost effective. The miscellaneous insurance line is increasing by 84% or $21,180. Is that all due to the new cyber insurance? That's question one regarding cyber.
Mitch?
Yeah, I was going to say I can take that. Thanks, Mike and Matt. So two things. First of all, we had very, very limited cyber insurance a couple of years ago. It was just a basic, and it was being covered by KERMA. So, I mean, it really wasn't covering what we needed to. We did an entire analysis with our other agent. This is HD Seeger, who went through with us to determine what we needed. And we had an outside company look at our situation as well. The cyber liability insurance on the town side for next year is $14,680 as budgeted. That's where we're at for budget right now. For the other issue that has really boosted the miscellaneous insurance is not just the cyber. We have a $30,000 policy necessary for flood insurance in the public works area. This was discovered based on a desk audit at KERMA, going through our records, and discovered we did not have flood insurance for an area of our public works facility that's in a flood zone. And so that 30,000 had to be picked up. And that's actually a bigger reason to answer Jonathan's question for the miscellaneous insurance going up. The cyber insurance also is requesting and requiring us to take certain actions to keep that that policy and the rate low as we can keep it. And we have been working, our insurance outside consultant, HD Seeger, Scott Sundberg, is working with myself, Mary Jane, and especially Tony in IT to make sure we implement the protections that are necessary to keep that as low as possible.
Great. Thank you, Mitch. Appreciate it.
And Mr. Chairman, I would add that in our audit,
Yeah.
we had a whole piece of our audit regarding the cybersecurity and cyber insurance. And one of the reasons we went with the firm we're going with is because they were able to continue to help us audit that in the future.
Yeah, that's a direct reflection of that audit. So, or the last couple of audits prior, before we implemented, because it continued to get called out a couple of times, and then we took care of it. So, thank you, Mitch.
I will also add, there were a couple of measures that they asked us to take internally, which I will not disclose here, in order for us to continue to qualify to get the cyber insurance. And we've taken those measures and implemented those measures through Tony's organization, through the IT organization.
Great. I'll stick on technology. The next question, Mr. Trotta had, there's an increase in information systems from actual salary costs in 21-22 to the new appropriation of $90,000, or a 77.6% increase. I am not clear on the details, so wanted to make sure I understood what was driving that increase.
That's a
I'm pretty
salary
sure it has to
question.
do
I'll
with-
give to Mitch.
Yeah, I got
Full-time salaries?
as we've talked. I'm pretty sure with the salaries, it mostly is probably going to go to the new employee that we hired to have a second employee in the IT department.
But Mitch, just if I might, that was already included in the current operating budget. So I'm not sure what Jonathan's referring to, but there's a 5.5% increase or $8,000 in salaries in the information systems budget line item. So I'm not sure that he may have been referring to something else, perhaps. Was he looking at 2021 actuals versus 2022 revised budget?
Yeah, Matt's correct. We have a 5.49% increase in that budget. And that was, both those salaries were adjusted as part of the GEA contract. So they both went up higher than the normal. But even at higher than normal, I'm still, as Matt just said, now that I've gained my place on my salary sheets, 5.5%, because Matt is correct. We did budget for that second position. So I'm not sure. Is that Jonathan I know Jonathan's not here. Was his question strictly on salaries?
It appears to be.
Okay, then I'm not sure what else to add to that, because there's only two salaries.
I mean, the way he said it was there was an increase in information systems from actual salary costs in 21-22 to the new appropriation of 90,000.
Well,
Okay. Yeah.
that would be based. Let me just try that first. That would be based on contract too. Remember, that may be based on the fact that when you passed a budget last year, we did not have a contract for the GEA. That was passed during the year, and that would have caused an increase in the actual salary movement. Mary Jane, am I there or something else?
No, that's not correct. He's referring back to a year before we had a second employee.
Oh.
So he's comparing one employee to two employees. So it's apples and oranges.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you for the clarification. His last question for the town was, I could not determine from my notes if there's any alternative to the third-party printing that has doubled the printing cost for the building department. Thought I would ask, though, to see if the additional $11,500 could be avoided.
A lot of that the printing in the building department is attributed to moving to a new software system in that area. And it's a part of the scanning process. And we did remove a part of that and covered it by the technology fund because of that.
Right. I'm assuming Jonathan is applauding us for taking a budget from 23,000 down to 11,500.
Maybe.
Yeah, right, because we applied
I
ARPA
don't know.
funding. I mean,
I'm
not
just
ARPA
asking the
funding.
questions.
Since the entire project for the EverGov system going into Town Hall South is being covered by the money we have set aside in committed fund balance. And since we determined that that additional cost in the building department was also part of that project, we are considering it part of the entire project and paying for that out of the technology reserve.
Great, thank you. Okay. That's it. That's it for Mr. Trot on the town. Anybody else have questions regarding the town budget, the debt service, or the bonding question that will be on regarding land acquisition? Okay. I'm sure if we need to, we could always circle back around, and I'm sure the town's not going anywhere.
I'm not going anywhere.
There's Mary Jane or Mitch for that matter. Sorry, keeping you.
Oh,
All right, well, we'll continue now with the questions that we have for the Board of Education. Superintendent Dr. Freeman and Chairwoman Dr. Balstraci are on. Anybody like to start off Board of Education questions? Veronica.
First of all, I wanted to publicly say, I know the students are not here on our call, and I'm hoping that somebody will actually tell them. But we had two students that came to the public hearing, Gabe Mangello and Sean McSweet, and they talked about the hockey team and all the fundraising that they had to do. And I, for one, had no idea. So I wanted to just compliment them and praise them for stepping up, and that they should know that their voice counts, because I learned something that night, and I appreciate them taking the time to speak to us that evening. I guess the question I have is, in the Board of Education's budget, besides the special ed teacher being shared between Baldwin Middle School and I think Lakes, can you tell me what in the budget will actually help those students that we've been hearing about for the last couple of years that are struggling, specifically our special ed students, children that are struggling academically? What are we doing to bring them up to speed that's in this budget? Especially because we were talking over the last 2 years specifically, but the transition years, K to 1 and 4 to 5, and the upper grades, 8 to 9 and stuff. What are we doing to help those kids that we know are struggling?
I'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and I'll start the answer, and I appreciate the question. A significant portion of those that assistance that you're talking about doesn't necessarily appear in these conversations or in the operational budget, because much of that is embedded in the ESSER 3 grant. So remember, the ESSER 3 grant came in at approximately $900,000. It currently includes 3 specific instructional positions. There are 2 school social work positions, as well as an English language learner teaching position. The first time Guilford's ever had a teaching level position for our English language learners. Now, this budget does show one of those social workers that we're looking to lift out of the ESSER grant and move into the operational budget this year. Additionally, that grant has significant money to assist the district as we focus on the actual instructional pedagogy that we're embracing to lead us through this pandemic. We're embracing an approach that is recognized as acceleration of learning. We're looking district-wide at how we support all of the students, because everyone has been impacted by this pandemic. But how do we support them at grade level in the mainstream classrooms, and not beginning to pick apart classrooms, and in fact, pick apart the way that we've built instruction by pulling students out for remediation, so that a student who was impacted last year during their 2nd grade year isn't getting pulled out of this grade's 3rd year experience to get those gaps filled, but we're talking about how to fill those gaps in the classroom in real time moving forward. We're working with the Partners for Educational Leadership out of Hartford, 6 other school districts, and then bringing that work back into district. We've got significant levels of additional teacher training that's going on this year. Teacher training that is happening outside the regular professional development days, outside of contract time. We're focusing on things like mindfulness in instruction. We're focusing on trauma-informed instructional techniques. We're focusing on formative assessment, so teachers are more keyed into how students are progressing in the classrooms. A significant portion of those dollars have been set aside for individualized or tutoring support, so that literally individual students who do have identified specific needs, we have an ability, we have a resource to go to provide those targeted at a specific individual level. Those are built into that ESSER budget. And then additionally, I would say that investment page that we teased out, that $409,000 that we identified, all of that is focused on those students that you talked about, not just the special ed position specifically. There's a classroom position at Cox that's necessary because of enrollment changes, and we want to control class size. We don't want to ignore that and allow class sizes to increase. We needed to staff in that building because class size is important. It allows for the individual contact. The social worker that I mentioned, the special ed teacher that you mentioned. I can't speak highly enough about the importance of the coaching model in Guilford. We're adding a coach to the model this year, and I really want to disabuse people of the notion that coaches aren't in there to support kids. Coaches support teachers, and teachers support kids. And a teacher, right? Teachers have gone through this pandemic as well. They're stressed, they're frustrated, they're wearied, and teachers don't support their kids if they're not feeling supported themselves. And so I know it's a step back, but it's really important when you take that step back that you've got somebody to look to and there's somebody there to catch you. I know that when we talk about the budget, we get caught up in counts and numbers and ratios. This entire budget is focused on the kids. It's focused on moving us through, hopefully, out of the pandemic. But it's all built around the kids. You know, that slide I showed that does focus on different categories of employees. The clerical category, the custodial category, and the administrative category are all empty this year. There's no increases in any of those sections. The teacher column, we're asking for an increase of 6.4 teachers, and that's layered on top of what we have in ESSER for the next 2 years. This budget is all about kids, and it's about those transition years that you mentioned, but it's also about this transition that we're still going through in this pandemic and trying to move through. Dr. Balistraci, I don't know if there's anything that you would add to that, but again, I really appreciate the question. We need to be reminded during the budget season to talk about instruction and talk about kids. We lose it because we talk about line items. And so I'm glad you asked that question tonight.
Really, the only thing I would add is that as Dr. Freeman mentioned, as we mentioned on Tuesday night, this budget does try to bring one of those positions that's in the ESSER grant back into the budget. Part of that is about the fact that we recognize, and I want to commend Lynn Landry. She was mentioning this on Tuesday when she's speaking about youth, the Child and Family Services, that we do not expect, right, that kids are going to recover from this pandemic in the short term, as soon as things get back to normal, whenever that might be, right? We are recognizing that for some kids, perhaps for many kids, we're in this for a longer haul, so that we are really trying to think long-term as well, and try to protect those positions that were added with the ESSER grant, because we expect that we're going to be supporting more kids than we have had to in the past for a longer period of time.
And I'll just jump back in. I looked down at my notes, which I should have done while I was talking. Another significant portion of the ESSER grant is that there is additional student contact time. We built in additional time over this past summer, and we're building in additional time again this coming summer for students to have additional contact time at grade level standards. And so again, it's not It's not what you think of as the traditional and negative summer school. It is more of grade level appropriate and in fact, really exciting project-based work so that students, the mindset is sort of not coming back to school to do again the stuff you didn't do well enough, but like a lacrosse camp for a kid who loves lacrosse during the season and gets more touches and more field time over the summer by going to another intensive camp. We're offering those additional student contact hours all the way through high school. Our high school students last year took a summer program that allowed them to research, write, and then deliver their own TED Talks. And it was all grade level appropriate, student directed, but gives them more time to build the academic muscles that we worry may have atrophied during the pandemic. And then I also failed to mention that baked into both of the ESSER funds and the operating budget is continued work around equity. Continued teacher training, continued coach training. We're not walking away from that either. And some of the students that we talk about in that category have been doubly impacted by these last 3 years. And so that's work that we're continuing to do as well.
One quick other question that I had is, how many students did you budget for outplacement? I don't think I heard that number.
Linda, and this is a bit of a moving target because outplacements aren't all the same, right? Some outplacements can cost $200,000, others might cost $100,000 or $120,000. But Linda's looking for her book. As she's looking to find the book and grab the number, what we did is the first step is that we look at all the students who are currently being supported. We look at who is aging out of the program and we move all the numbers up, and then we build in an expected number that we see coming through preschool and into the elementary every year. So we build it around real students based on who we see and how they're moving through their calendar with us. And all of that said, when Linda finds a number, remember it's sort of a ballpark because you never know exactly.
I know that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Why don't we take Linda off the hot
No
seat?
pressure, Linda.
Yeah, why don't we take
I mean,
Linda off the hot seat? We'll go back to her.
Yeah, maybe I can grab another question and then come back to Linda. That would be perfect.
Yeah.
Mine kind of piggybacks off what you already touched on. So, and this is, I think, more for the public too, and for on the record, because I think there's been a lot of questions and concerns around why is now the best time to add the math and STEM coach. So could you just speak to why this timing is ideal for that in this budget?
Yeah, and I think I started to mention it, right? So the coaches are there to support teachers, to help teachers be more effective, more impactful in their teaching. And teachers have never gone through a more challenging 2 years of their career. We are seeing impacts from the pandemic. There are students who are struggling to pick up content because they've had spotty attendance, or they've been on Zoom and then they've been in class and they've been impacted by school closures or quarantines. We're seeing students who are struggling at the younger grades with some socialization that we would have expected them to have mastered by now. So again, for a teacher to have an embedded professional developer who works in her school that she can go to and say, help me with this. This lesson worked pre-pandemic and it's not working now. Can you come in and help me spot the areas that I need to refine? I don't think there's any more important time to make sure that teachers have that level of support. And so, again, we've spent 12 years building up this coaching cohort. We did not add a position last year because we were focused on those more direct student positions. But this year we are asking to add one more, specifically broadening out of our focus on literacy and mathematics that we've had for so long, and bringing in those other STEM disciplines. Elementary teachers are responsible for teaching all of it. Yes, the reading and the math, but also the science and the social studies. And it's tough to be an expert in all 4 of those core areas. They're generalists, but when they're supported by experts, it helps them to be more effective.
Amy, before you go, to see if Linda has our answer regarding the special education enrollment.
I do. It's a total of 48 students. There were 29 private placements, 19 public. And we do have some funds in there for potential others, but it's not a named number of students. Sorry, I didn't have that right away.
Gotcha, Linda. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Amy,
Okay, two just blunt clarifications on what we've just been talking about. So the STEM coach is not like a paid version of Mr. Piscatelli who comes in and has FaceTime with the kids, or somebody who's a reading coach that's pulling a kid out of the classroom to do something one-on-one. It's just somebody who's working with the teachers. Is that correct?
That is exactly correct. Yep. So we do have, you know, Mr. Piscatelli, who's come in and continued to do extra sort of outdoor nature-based science experiments, hands-on with kids. We do have at the elementary level reading specialists who intentionally pull students out for one-to-one or small group interventions. But the instructional coaches, you're exactly right. They are assigned to the teachers. They actually don't report to the building principals. They report to Dr. Crystal out of the curriculum office. They're assigned to a building. And essentially, right, the way we like to think about it is the principal who evaluates the teachers, supervises the teachers, and it is the principal whose expectations the teachers are required to meet. The coaches are there to help every teacher be successful in meeting those really high expectations that the principals set. So they work directly with the teachers in the building, and they support the students. Now, that doesn't mean they never work with students. There are times that they will parallel teach in a classroom with a teacher. There are times that they will model teach, and teachers will watch the coach delivering the lesson, but their focus and their purpose is in helping all of the teachers become better and more impactful. And when they work with students, it's in the service of that professional growth of the teachers.
Okay, thank you. And then another clarification with the social worker that's coming out of the ESSER grant, presumably we're not just not spending that ESSER money. So that ESSER funding that would have gone to the social worker is then going to the programs that you were speaking to moments ago.
Exactly right. The ESSER grants were required to do a lot of paperwork and a lot of tracking, and we were required to submit a spending plan up front, but the spending plan is amendable. And so if we can pull a salary out this year, then that's more dollars that becomes available for direct individual student support, more student contact time over the summer, or more teacher training. Exactly right.
All right, thank you. Can I ask one more unrelated question to what we've been talking about?
Go ahead.
Okay with us if it's okay with the chair.
It's fine
It's
with
really
me.
effective. On the capital request for the New England Road project, what is the time frame? Like how long would it be if we approve the money for it? When would Lathrop House be vacated, so to speak? Like when would everybody be moved into that?
It's probably early in the project for us to have that timeline. I would need to defer to Mr. Gurnham for that. And in fact, we were just talking at the district, you know, just sort of in-house the other day about would it make sense for Lathrop to be the first move or the last move. And so we'd be relocating folks from 3 different locations in town into that center. And I didn't know if it would make more sense to empty out one of the other larger locations that will still belong to us because it becomes usable swing space, or if it makes sense to get the few of us here at Lathrop over first and then turn this back over to the town. But if we do that, we lose it as available swing space. So I'll just have to say not clear yet, and I'd need to defer to Mr. Gurnham to get you a better answer, but we're beginning to plan for it.
Is it months or years?
Oh, months. We
Okay.
expect it would,
All right.
yeah. It's a relatively small project
Okay.
compared to what we would usually do. The only other caveat to that, though, is that we would obviously want to prioritize school-based projects over the summer. And so a project like this one that's impacting offices rather than classrooms might be something that we deferred so that we could focus on having schools ready to open for September. That's always sort of a driving force. We get 2 months to do all the big projects and try to have them ready for September.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff, go ahead.
Yep, just to go back to the mastery diploma and the STEM. I know in the past, finding world language and science teachers has been an issue. Do you anticipate any of the same types of challenges finding a STEM coach? I just because the number of candidates out there is a small pool, and they typically command a higher salary than a elementary or middle school teacher might.
That's a really interesting question. I would speculate to say no, because the teacher shortage, especially in areas, you're right, like science and world language, has all the districts sort of competing at that same classroom level. What's interesting about a coaching position is that we really are targeting somebody who is later career, more experienced, and therefore it's much more likely that we end up getting candidates who have been comfortable and successful in other districts around the state, but are willing to make that move because it's a change in their career, right? They're going from the exceptional classroom teacher to now become that professional developer. We haven't struggled to fill our coaching positions because I think it's a really attractive position in a really high profile, attractive district. So I'm going to speculate and say, no, I don't anticipate to see the challenge there. I am concerned more broadly about filling classroom positions next year. We've always had the luxury of essentially being 100% staffed in certified positions by the first week or two of school. I heard an NPR story literally just earlier today. Hartford Public Schools is still working right in March. They're still functioning at 75% certified staffing. They've got 25% of their budgeted certified positions empty. I don't anticipate we'll be seeing numbers of that magnitude, but I am worried that we may start having some trouble filling certified classroom positions in the near future. The shortage, I don't expect it to affect positions like assistant principal, coach, but regular classroom positions, I think we may begin struggling with some of what other districts have been struggling with for years.
And I know you've budgeted a certain amount of attrition, but I'm hearing along the same lines of what you just described. Aside from challenges in hiring people, just the number of teachers who are resigning or retiring earlier than they might have just because of the experiences of the last 2 years. And I mean, I know you all have your ear to the ground and it's difficult to guess, but what are you seeing from contemporaries throughout the state in terms of what they're anticipating?
We're all worried, and in fact, that we're having a lot of conversations about trying to establish some ground rules about not pillaging from each other. We're going to see increased retirements this year, and so the retirement savings built into this budget I mentioned on Tuesday evening are fairly conservative. There were past years that we counted on maybe 4 or as many as 6 positions where we expected to see somebody retire out at the very top of the salary scale, and we thought we'd be able to hire in at a relatively low step. We've only budgeted for 2 of those positions because I think, again, in areas like science and world language, we may not be generating a savings at all, right? To fill that position, we may need to be willing to hire somebody who themselves is experienced and at a very high step and is looking to change from one district to come to Guilford, but not having the opportunity to find somebody mid-career or early career because there's going to be a lot of competition for those positions.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay. I have questions for Mr. Trotta. And I'll be honest, I'm getting more by text now on the town, back to the town. So I'm trying to manage that. But why don't I stay on the Board of Education and start reading some of these in, and then if there's questions embedded, I'll try to help you out and where I think the clarification is needed. The largest issue for Mr. Trotta is any expansion of staff. A number of residents have asked me why a declining student population, we are not seeing larger savings and staff reductions by attrition. I always express my concerns when new positions are being considered and question if the value they add justifies the additional cost to the taxpayer. I'm of the opinion that the existing staff can support the students with the new mastery diploma 1 credit requirement. I would prefer if the Board of Education would first try to see how well the current staff can work with students to meet the additional requirement. I also would like to wait to see how well other schools that have opted not to expand staff do, how they do meeting the new state requirement. That particular comment is all regarding that segment of area. So I don't know if you have, Dr. Freeman, if you want to address anything in there.
Start, this is a graduation requirement for next year. The students who graduate next year are required to have 1 credit in this identified mastery graduation slot. We can't wait until next year. It's to go into next year and say we're going to try to support it with existing staff and see how that works when we have looked at our existing staff and do not have the bodies available to cover the additional classes would therefore mean taking 600 existing students, dividing them across all of the teachers assigned into that building right now, and telling each of them that, hey, in addition to all the teachers you're teaching and preparing for, you also now need to support 8 or 10 or 11 students who are conducting an independent study. That's not good instructional planning. That doesn't take care of our students, and it's not respectful of the teachers in the building. We're adding a wholly new graduation requirement, and in a $65 million budget, we're setting aside $125,000 to be able to be thoughtful about the way that we do that. We piloted the first semester with half of the junior class just behind us this year. We're now doing the second semester. We're talking to the students who are in those pilots. We're hearing from parents. We're looking at how we did it, and we're going to make adjustments moving forward. But to expect an existing staff to carry the load, I think is not good instructional planning. I don't think it's good socially and emotionally for what we're asking the students to do. And I don't think it's respectful of a staff that has helped take these high school students through these last 2 or 3 years. I'll point out, and maybe I failed to mention this Tuesday night. If I failed to mention it, I'll say it. And if I just don't remember I said it, I'll repeat it. There's a number of other districts who may not be showing staffing increases because they're covering this new need with what would have otherwise been reductions this year. And maybe if we didn't have that, right, we are not looking at cutting high schools. We wouldn't be looking at cutting high school staff this year if we weren't adding this new expectation. We looked at our numbers, we looked at our class sizes, we looked at our distribution, we did that analysis. We need the staff to be able to cover this and to do it well and properly for the kids. I'll remind the board, there have been other years where we've done exactly what Mr. Trotta is talking about. We launched the alternative high school and didn't add teaching staff because at that moment in time, we capitalized on the declining enrollment to provide a new service. This year, we don't have that alignment. And so this year we needed to ask for the increase to meet this new expectation. Dr. Balistraci, I know that we've talked about this a lot and you spoke to it Tuesday night. I'm sure you've got.
Again, as a board, I think we really determined that if from a purely financial standpoint, if we were looking at giving teachers stipends to cover this work with students outside a classroom setting, that it was financially would not make any kind of significant decrease, but from a programmatic standpoint could really create a much lesser experience for students. We as a board are interested in hearing more about this program as Ms. Chaff at the high school talks to students about their experience as high school staff work on moving this program forward with information about student experience. But we really felt that we needed to give the high school an opportunity to move forward with a program that they thought would really be impactful for students while again meeting the requirement. The other thing, if I may, Mr. Earls, just quickly mention, because Mr. Trotta mentioned several positions. Just a reminder, one of them is a special ed teacher that is being put into the budget because we are seeing increased number of kids. So overall enrollment might go down a little bit. Our number of identified children needing special services is increasing. Another, again, I don't know if he's counting this, is a social worker that exists, but is simply coming off an ESSER grant, and we're trying to be fiscally responsible in the long term with that decision. Another is a classroom teacher in kindergarten. I will say my first experience with a Board of Education meeting was 19 years ago when I attended a Board of Ed meeting because I had a child who was one of 24 kids in a kindergarten classroom at Guilford Lakes, and it was not good. Class size matters. And so the Board of Ed has really very closely tried to protect that in our system because it helps students. So thank you.
Yeah, I was almost going to interrupt you, and only because the next three items had to do with exactly the same three things that you just talked about. And so I will say that regarding the additional teacher at Cox, I'll paraphrase his comment for due to time, that he is in support of it to satisfy the recommended class sizes. Basically, he made the comments, my understanding, I think he said SE, which I guess would be special education, class sizes are smaller than state maximums. I don't know if it was supposed to be special education, but it said SE. But I feel that our smaller class sizes lead to a measurable higher quality of education in Guilford. So regarding the teacher, he was in agreement. The social worker, oh, I'm sorry, I thought I heard something.
Nope.
The social worker and the additional special education position, he questioned the use of the ARP funding. And I believe you both addressed that. On the social worker, regarding, he believed the positions paid with our ARP funds is going to now be paid from the operating budget. Same thing with the special education position. He's suspected to be in the same circumstance. He's preferring, again, I'm paraphrasing, he's preferring the use of the grant money before it goes into the budget. And that the ARP money be exhausted before asking taxpayers to fund the additional positions too. I don't know if you want to make any further comment on that. I think it was addressed regarding.
Yeah, again, I think what we're looking at here is when these funds are no longer available, we would prefer not to then come to the town with 3 positions that all of a sudden have to be absorbed. We would rather do it more gradually.
Yeah, got it.
Mike, if I could just add one other thing to that, this is really just a comment rather than a question.
Sure, go ahead, Jeff.
I think particularly with the special education position and with the, to a lesser degree, to the social worker, this to me seems like it's in keeping with the Board of Education's practice of trying to retain as many students in district as possible. It's one more resource to try and keep address the needs of our students that might otherwise need to be outsourced at, the numbers Dr. Freeman mentioned earlier this evening were $200,000 now $120,000 for some students, and maybe a smaller scale for others. But I mean, the graph that was in the budget presentation and how we've narrowed the gap between actual costs and projected costs is a result of the fact that we've hired more staff to keep our students in district. And aside from the cost savings, I don't want it to seem that it's all about money, although this is the Board of Finance. The benefits of keeping these students in district is not just financial. There's social and developmental benefits because they're not being exported. And I know I'm not a member of the Board of Education, and I don't want to sound like I'm advocating for them, but part of what Jonathan is saying is and what he's praised the Board of Education for, to my recollection over the last couple of years, is precisely because they've engaged, they've hired these types of staff. I get what his position is, but it seems to me that it's in keeping with what's worked well for the district over the last, 6-7 years. I mean, if I'm wrong, tell me, but.
No, I
a
think
good
that's
point.
I think that's exactly right. And I would only add two other things really quickly. One is to remind the board and the community that we have been talking about social emotional wellness and learning in this district long before the pandemic hit, right? And so this is not a new focus for us. This is something that we have been talking about and focusing on for years prior to the advent of the pandemic. But that being said, I again can only reiterate what Lynn Landry said Tuesday evening, because she's exactly right. The social, emotional, and mental needs that students are going to develop through this pandemic are not going to go away because we stop wearing masks or because the numbers drop. Those are going to be lagging. And so I am enormously appreciative of all of the ARPA monies, whether it was CARES or ESSER. But the need for support for students who have experienced these last 3 years of interrupted schooling isn't going to end. If all of a sudden we declare that the pandemic and the virus itself are defeated, those mental and emotional and academic impacts are going to lag, and we're going to need to have continued support to bring students through that.
There was mention, I'm going to move on, questions. There was a question regarding, he said the math coach. I believe he's talking about the STEM coach. Not the math coach,
Right,
but-
so
Yeah, well, let me just read it real quick. In his notes, he was under the impression there are 12, but maybe they're not all math coaches, which again, I think we're talking about the STEM coach. Two teachers suggested that PNU suggested a math interventionist would provide more value at a lower cost, and he would urge the coach be foregone for the budget cycle or consider an additional interventionalist.
So, I appreciate the comment. We do have literacy coaches. That's still the single largest portion of the instructional coaches we have, who work with reading acquisition and reading development. We do have math coaches. There's a smaller number of math coaches in the district. And this position we're talking about at this moment in time would be the first STEM coach, which, right, STEM does include mathematics. It's science, technology, engineering, and math. So there's some overlap there. And I did mention on Tuesday evening that by reassigning and by adjusting some of the other existing positions in place, this one addition gets us the STEM support at the lower grade levels, but also allows us to pull math coaching into the high school for the first time. I understand the importance of interventionists as well. But again, if we're speaking from a Board of Finance perspective, if we're talking about impact, an interventionist only impacts the specific students with whom he or she works. And so that is an important investment, and at times it's a needed investment. A coach has a larger footprint. A coach impacts all of the teachers with whom she works, and then those teachers impact their full caseloads. So you go from an interventionist who can impact one caseload, and maybe that's 20 or 30 students spread across a week. But a coach who works with 10 teachers is impacting 10 caseloads, and at the elementary level, that's going to average 19 students. So that's 190 students that are being impacted by that coach building the professional impact. So, and we've got a balance. We do have reading specialists who work in the classrooms at the elementary level, but we're building the coach model, and the coach model is growing, not just in Guilford, it's growing everywhere, in part because it's a good instructional model, and in part because it's an efficient model because of that multiplier effect. So I appreciate the question. We did discuss interventionists as part of this year's budget, and we chose to move with the coaching position for the reasons I just mentioned.
Thank you. I'll move on to the next comment. And clarification, I believe that's requested. Dr. Freeman, I believe that these are my words. I believe that Jonathan spoke to you about this possibly the way he worded it. It was not clear to me if the additional 25,000 for the social equity liaison is in addition to the appropriation from last year or just the second year annual cost for the position. After a conversation with Dr. Freeman, I'm under the impression that there are no formal complaints. Perhaps it can be clarified as to the workload of the liaison in terms of cases, complaints, or incidents. I would still recommend that the current staff absorb this workload to save the taxpayer at the cost of the additional staff.
So I think Mr. Trout is talking about the family equity liaison. That is a contracted
Yes.
position that we built into the budget last year at a cost of $25,000. Those monies continue to exist in the budget this year. We have not teased them out. We haven't drawn special attention to them this year because they're not new costs. It is a continuing cost from last year. Dr. Harrison has been working in the district this year. I meet with him monthly. He works with principals periodically, and he has been fielding contacts from families in the community through the year. I don't have a specific list on the number of those contacts that he's had. I wouldn't characterize them all as complaints. Some have been, but in some cases, it is a family member who's reaching out to Dr. Harrison to ask a question or to clarify something or to have a conversation with him about something that's happening. He works at various levels. He works with in professional development with the leadership team. He meets with me monthly to strategize and to plan moving forward. He and I are scheduling an evening event to meet with parents of students who identify as members of marginalized populations or groups moving forward. And so, yeah, the money continues to be in there. Again, I would argue that our principals do this sort of work all the time as well, but Dr. Harrison also brings an expertise that we don't currently have in-house. Dr. Harrison this year is running a network of diversity, equity, and inclusion administrators across the state of Connecticut who are working collaboratively on issues of equity, social justice, inclusion in schools. So at times we're talking about a capacity in the form of numbers, right? Do our administrators have the capacity and the time to be available for parents to have these conversations and to do the training that is incumbent and then moving forward and doing better after those conversations. But at times we bring in particularly contracted experts because they have experiences and expertise that our current staff doesn't have. And just like a coach with a teacher, they need to model for us and work with us until we can develop that competence more locally in our existing team. So the money's still in there. I fully support those dollars being in there. I would not suggest reducing a $65 million budget by $25,000 and asking our existing administrative staff to try to do that at the level that Dr. Harrison is doing that, and then learn from ourselves as we stumble through that without his modeling and support.
Thank you. There's two more questions that he has, and they're more technology related. So before we do that, Mr. Scretta from the Board of Education, I see your hand up. Would you like to address that issue or another issue?
No, it's just a point of parliamentary inquiry. I feel like we're shadow boxing a little bit right now. Is there, have these questions been submitted in the proper means and in due diligence with the way that any member of the public would have been submitting questions?
They've been submitted to me.
Okay.
They were texted to me based on an emergency situation that Mr. Trotta had. I felt it was only appropriate to be able to bring his questions to, but these will be, by the way, I have put them into a document that will be entered for Tracy to be able to, utilize as a guidance for the questions.
Yep. No, and I don't have any problem with them. It's just,
No,
thank you.
No, I understand. In fact, there were a couple more questions for the town, and I basically had to say, listen, if the texts keep coming in, I mean, I understand, but he's in the air right now. So I think the questions, he got them all out. So, but I do, Arnold, I do appreciate the concern. The last two questions that came up were about cyber insurance. Again, I believe I alluded to this earlier. The addition of the cyber insurance is probably going to be very similar to the same answer, but it was for about 29,000, 29.5. He said he wasn't fully comfortable with it. I think it's the type of insurance more appropriate for a business that makes its revenue primary from an online website. But if some scenarios can be explained of how the coverage would work and spare the Board of Ed from loss, I would feel comfortable with the significant premium. If systems are redundant and backed up properly, many contingencies can be addressed. I do believe that this was addressed pretty well in the town side. So as long as there's no further comment on that, I did see Dr. Balstracy come off of mute.
I was just going to add that.
If you didn't
that
mean to,
we-
that's okay too. But
No. I do want to add that as a school system, we have information on 3,000 plus students
totally,
that really we need to protect.
that's the explanation in my mind. Yep, absolutely. So no issue there. Oh,
Mr. Chairman, beyond that,
yep.
ransomware could render the school district and the town inoperable.
Understood.
So
understood.
to assume that we don't need some kind of coverage for ransomware is a fool's errand.
Understood. Mr. Hirsch, Board of Education.
Piggybacking on that, one of the biggest trends in ransomware happens to be on school systems in the United States. It's becoming exponentially an issue, and so this is money well invested compared to what we'd be facing.
Great. Thank you. There was one last extra spend that he wanted to, 31,000 for network security. I'm guessing that this may very well be a very similar question, but he thought that was a large enough item to discuss. Whether it was discretionary, how much value it adds, and might there be a less expensive alternative?
I think that goes to some of the other items that he mentioned. That combines both some support and consulting from an outside expert, as well as some of the more physical, I don't know if physical is the right word, concrete suggestions that he made about things like backup. The insurance very much leans towards the idea of a cyber or ransom attack, but we also are looking to do better locally around things like backing up and hardening, and we needed some consulting to do that. And so those dollars cover both the consulting and the advice, and then the implementation of the recommendations received.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else on the Board of Finance have questions for the Board of Education? And when you go last, I do have one actually, but it's to bonding. And a couple of my questions were actually already given and answered. Amy, thanks for stealing mine on the, which one was it? It was the schedule on the 595. That was a really good question. I know we have the backup in front of us regarding the all the bonded projects, but on the replacement tennis courts. If I'm the public and I'm looking at $738,000 bonded on the tennis courts, this is not, first of all, one thing, two things. One is it's not moving. It's staying where it is. That's number one, because it says replacement. So just to be clear, it's not relocation, it's replacement. And then being a larger amount, this is not just a restriping. This is not putting up new nets. This is a complete substrate replacement. And again, I know we have the backup, but I want the public to be clear that, you know, replacement of tennis courts is expensive. The substrate, if the substrate fails, your tennis courts are rendered useless, as we all know. And they were renovated, I believe, to this level in the 90s. So I did want to bring that up, and if you had anything further, but it's a warranted number for what has to be done to those tennis courts.
No, that's exactly right for the scale of the project. And then I would only add the impact of the project, right? Those tennis courts support both the instructional program at the school during the school day as they support PE classes. They support a varsity athletic program on that location. And they're one of the few places that we share with the community, right? When the schools are not using them, they get a lot of community use as well. And so yes, it's a significant investment because the work needed is deep. It's not just a cosmetic resurfacing, but there's also a significant impact because they get used in multiple ways at multiple levels, including community use. And so it really is a significant impact for the investment.
Great. Excellent. Okay. Any other questions for the Board of Education? Okay. With that, I believe we are all set. Regarding questions. So at this point, we're still in the same agenda item after the questions, which is now to discuss and consider the budgets that were presented to us, and again, possibly vote to move a budget forward to town meeting, which I'll remind now and later on that is currently scheduled for Tuesday, April 5th in person at the community center, and that's where this budget will go to. With that, we could start the discussion about the budgets and what we may want to do with them. And that includes expenditures and includes revenues. I figured I would open it up to the board rather than me start. Ms. Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
I guess I'll start.
Why don't you start?
First of all, I want to say thank you to my colleagues on the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education, all the department heads, all the staff in the preparations for these budgets. We've been doing this for quite a few months, so this isn't a big endeavor. I sat through the department head presentations, the capital plan presentations, the joint meetings with the Board of Ed, 2 public hearings with the Board of Ed, Board of Selectmen presentations. And through all of that, we heard testimony about the impacts of COVID on our citizens, on our children, on our workforce, how much they rely on our social programs, our senior programs, all of it. And I think Dr. Freeman said it the best earlier tonight. People are weary. We're all weary. It's been a long 2 years. I believe that government's job is to serve people. And I believe that these 2 budgets do exactly that. And I would argue that if we make any cuts, we hurt people. People that right now need these services and programs. I think it's in the best interest that we put forth the budgets as is to the voters without any cuts. The Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education have the responsibility of telling us what they need to run the town. We have the responsibility of saying whether or not we can afford it. I believe we can. I believe we should. Because if we don't, the most vulnerable people in our community, I think, will be impacted even further. The Board of Finance has been extremely cautious the last 2 years through this pandemic with things that are happening in our economy, job loss, so forth and so on. But we're on the other side of this. So now we're seeing different impacts of COVID. And I think the services that we provide are vitally needed. And so that's how I feel. And I think we need to put forth these 2 budgets to the voters as is without any cuts. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Any other members of the Board of Finance like to speak about the budgets?
Just really quickly, I would just second what Veronica said. I think, the Board of Ed did many public hearings, got a lot of feedback from the public. I actually commend them for, cutting the things that were mentioned in the public hearings. They did go back and actually listen to the constituents and cut certain things out of the budget. Similar on the town side, I think the town did a really good job of looking at all the budgets and really making smart decisions as to where they thought the priorities were. I think we've heard this, and I think we all are feeling it. Like, we're all exhausted. We're all in need of support services. regardless of, our status. So I think if we ever have an opportunity, given especially even just the economic circumstances of the town with the grand list, if we ever have an opportunity to keep these budgets whole in a time where people need it the most, I think now is the time to do it, because I don't think we'll have that opportunity in the next 3 to 4 years. So I would second Veronica and agree that we should put them forth to the voters as is.
Amy, I did see that your hand went up, and then Jeff.
Thank you. I guess I will third Veronica's comments. A couple comments that resonated with me over all these meetings. Dr. Freeman said several times that the last several years have been responsible budgets put forth for the voters, and I would say this one is one as well, that the discretionary spending is a very small portion of the increase. And the other comment that has stayed with me was from Mr. Hirsch in one of the Board of Ed meetings, that we don't want to just be the status quo. We don't want to be, just getting by with, the comment was specifically about the mastery recommendation, or the mastery requirement, but we want to be at the high level that our public and our students expect. And I think that the investments put forth in the Board of Ed side really speak to that level. And as Megan mentioned, both the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen made responsible cuts where they felt they could. And I'm comfortable putting forth the budget as is to the public.
Reedy.
I'm going to respectfully dissent mildly with my fellow board members. I agree with them wholeheartedly that these are responsible budgets and well crafted, and reflect a lot of time, effort, thought from all the participants who put them together. I do think that there may be some room to make a small reduction. My figure would be $200,000, 120 from the Board of Ed, 180 from the town. That would, by my calculation, reduce the increase from a little under 2% to 1.75%, which is still well below the inflation that we're seeing throughout the country. And I just think it'd be an opportunity to offset the impact that our citizens are feeling in a variety of locations right now going forward. So that's my thought. I do think that, as has been noted, the cost drivers are largely non-discretionary. We've been fortunate to, through Mr. Spurgeon, to reduce the increase in the health insurance, which is by far the biggest driver in the budget, in the budgets, other than in addition to the negotiated increases. And I just think it would be a responsible way to increase the budget to address the needs of the town citizens, but at a slightly higher rate than if we just presented the budgets as is. That's my thought. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Jeff. Mr. Hartman.
Oh, yeah, it is up there. There it is. There it
is.
All right, good. This is a tough one, because in the midst of 7+% inflation, we're turning in a budget that's taxing people 2% higher. But I agree with Governor Lamont that property taxes are the most aggressive. And who are we trying to look after here? I don't have the numbers for Guilford, but for Connecticut, the poorest half of residents in the state pay about 13% of all their income on property tax, and the other half pay about 7% to less than 1%. So, who are we trying to help here? The increases have been due to non-discretionary expenses, and we all understand that. And then other people have mentioned that. I get that. But we would be remiss not to acknowledge that everybody else in town are facing this year extraordinary non-discretionary increases in cost of living. So I could go on with plenty of examples and so forth, but I agree with Jeff Beatty. I think that $200,000 on a $109 million budget is less than 0.2%. And I think it would be good of us to acknowledge that and reduce the budget accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Before I say my piece, I did, of course, get a text from Mr. Trotta, and I'm just going to read what he wrote, and then I will finish up the conversations or our opinions. He did say, if I were able to attend, I would support a motion that would ask the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education to make reductions to the budget, even though there is not a high degree of discretionary spending because of the increase this year is untypically high. I would think there's a possibility of $500,000 worth of cuts that could be made with most of the flexibility on the Board of Education side. Most of the flexibility would be in just on delaying projects until the following year in the operating capital. Now, we know we can't tell the Board of Education where to make their cuts, but that is his opinion regarding where he would go. I was joking actually prior with a couple of people as people were coming into this meeting that I've been doing this for a while, and usually every year I have prepared notes, and I prepare for a couple hours on what I'm going to say, and I prepared zip on this one, and I'll tell you why. I too am very conflicted on what to do with these budgets, not in size or cuts or anything. Veronica started off very, very well saying we've been through a lot. We've all shaken. I look around and we're all tired. Now, it could be that it's 9:18 on our budget workshop after we've been dealing with these budgets, and that's perfectly fair. But I wrote 5 bullet points, and I have never done this before, but I'm going to wing it. And if there's a siren that goes underneath my window, I'm at work, and that's what happens in Bridgeport. I have to live with sirens. I wanted to tell 2 stories very quickly. I'm going to try to get through these after the sirens go by underneath. My apologies. I want to start with my 83-year-old father. He's requiring much more need now. I don't have to say who the people are that are involved in the social services department. The pro and con of doing it in Bridgeport. Doing it in Bridgeport, the pro is that I got great connection and not, but the con is I have to deal with that. Okay. My father needs a lot more services with social services. And I have watched social services basically, in a lot of ways, change his life, allowing him to be able to get help. And sometimes him just walking in to social services and having a friend. And I think we all know who's in that department. And she's great. The second story, and that's on the town side. On the Board of Education side, I'm going to tell you a little story about a special education teacher I know. And most people don't know this, but this particular special education teacher has been in special education with the town of Guilford for, I don't even know how long. I'm going to say 15, 20 years. But at one point moved up every single year with her students to stay with them because of the parents' requests. You don't get that very often. Parents are just overwhelmed with the fact that the Board of Education, that the school system supported that move. This special education teacher started in kindergarten, 1st grade, and is now at the high school and has moved every year with the kids. Where do you get that? I look at what this town provides, and to sit here and crunch numbers, yeah, we could do that, but at what cost? Are we going with a increase of this and increase of that? Do we want to get the budgets under 5? Do we want to have the mill rate You know, at some point you have to say, listen, we need something. The community needs us to say, you know what, let's go forward with what budgets we have. And allow the voters to decide if it's important enough. And if it's not, then you know what? We've done it before. We go back to the drawing board and we very systematically go through and we decide what we think is right to go back to the voters for. But I think these are right. And I do agree with my colleagues because I was very, very torn on making any reductions at all. But what's the message? Is the message that we make a reduction for the sake of making a reduction for a small amount, or do we keep them intact because the community needs us? So I looked at the percentages of the Board of Ed. They were already mentioned. The last 6 years, the Board of Education increases. I'm going to start with the oldest first, starting from 0.69, 1.28, 1.44, 1.77, 1.61, 1.41. Do you think we can maybe do a little over 5 this year? Do you think it's worth it? I do. And the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education listen to constituents, they listen to people, and more so on the town side, Mr. First Selectman, don't take this the wrong way, but the Board of Education had public hearings. Not that yours weren't public, but they had literally public input. What people wanted and thought was a need, whether it was hockey, whether it was coaching, whatever it ended up being, it was put in the budget and stayed there. What they didn't believe in, it got taken out. So to say that the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen don't listen, they did. Not that they haven't in the last, many years that I've been a part of this, but I think that says a lot. The Grantless growth that Megan alluded to, that we may not get many opportunities like this. To have a 4.5 increase in the budgets and then have Grantless growth what it is and still come in under 2%. Again, I say, all right, it's 1.94 right now as we stand, no changes. And we didn't even talk about revenue, by the way. But if we didn't change anything, we're still under 2. So if we get to 1.7 or I think that's what 200,000 would do. It gets us to 1.75 or 6. We could do it, but does the community need it more than the cut we would give? And still, we know that the community is hurting, but is it more on the level of emotional, social services, the things that are needed that way? Or is it to provide a little bit of a cut in the amount of money they pay? And I get it, it's important. Every little bit counts. But we're all doing it too. We're all paying taxes too. Would we want a 0% increase? Of course. The community, that'd be irresponsible to this community. The community needs it. I think that the fact that we're just under 2%, I think that's a statement that says we've invested smartly in this town. The Grantless has grown the last 3 years, maybe 4. I don't exactly remember, but it has grown, and we have the biggest growth this year than we ever had, at least to the knowledge of anybody on this particular meeting. So as much as I would like to maybe consider a reduction, I do not see, after literally thinking about this, going through the numbers and looking at the past history, again, of 2 years under 1% on a mill rate increase, I think we just go as it is. And I do agree with my colleagues, Veronica and Amy and Megan, that I think we leave them intact because it's the responsible thing to do for the community. And I see it on an everyday level. I see it with my father. And I see it with people that I'm associated with in my friends and family circle that are teachers in the system, that work for the system, for the town, for the Board of Ed. They're doing this every day. Their life is not easy. And I think we should repay that. I think we should contribute to it. So I would agree that we don't touch the budgets. I also, before I ask for a motion, the revenue side we haven't touched or talked about. I'll just start the discussion on that, saying I don't think we got fortunate on non-tax revenue. The amount we have to bring in from property taxes has gone down from last year, was a lower percentage. We weren't as fortunate last year. But the same way, we stopped using unassigned fund balance. We use it the last couple of years, and I did an analysis. I mean, I go back to my time beginning on the Board of Finance with our first selectman using the unassigned fund balance at times where it was really not a good idea to do it. You know, we're healthier now, but God forbid, the reason you have an unassigned fund balance is for an emergency purpose. That's meaning that emergencies aren't planned. And to touch that, to offset anything, I know that there might be some want to go there. I kind of thought about it. I wouldn't want to touch that either. I think the revenue side is just as good. And we're fortunate. And I do back up what Megan said. We just don't have maybe more options to do this. And so let's take advantage of it while we can and not worry about a 5% tax increase and get under 2 and get the community what they need. Does anybody have any further comments or discussion points regarding the budgets? Again, either revenue or expenditures. With that, if no one wants to entertain a motion, I will do so. You know, I got to write all that stuff down so I remember it and don't stumble, but I'll
I'll
stumble.
put forth a motion, Mr. Chairman. I just don't have the numbers. I make a motion that we put forth the Board of Education budget and the Board of Selectmen budget to the town voters. I just don't have the numbers as is with no cuts.
What I will do is I'll read the motion and you can go ahead and you can start it off. So the numbers as is. I would entertain a motion to approve the town budget of $34,018,909 plus debt service of $10,264,901 and a Board of Education budget of $65,629,734 for a total budget of $109,913,544.
So moved.
Do I hear a
Second,
second?
second,
Thank you. Further discussion? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? What I should do, because we're virtual, I should basically ask each person, I'm going to do it based on how I see you on the screen, no particular order. Ms. Wallace,
Yes.
Ms. Earls,
Yes.
Ms. Scanlon,
yes.
Mr. Hartman,
Yes.
Mr. Beatty.
Yes.
Thank you. That concludes the vote on the Board of Finance side.
You didn't vote, Mike.
Are you
You have
voting?
to vote.
Ms. Rails?
You forgot yourself.
Oh, I thought it was darn obvious where I was going with that.
Yeah, he was
Okay.
there.
All right, aye, I'm in. That's what happens when you get your mind going. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me. I very much appreciate that. I would not be good if the chair didn't vote on this budget. All right, we have actually 3 more motions that I'm going to entertain. One to approve the revenue budget. And I'm just going to say as allocated and presented to the Board of Finance.
So moved.
Second.
Further discussion? Again, I will go in the same order because no one moved on their screen. Ms. Wallace,
Aye.
Ms. Earls,
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon,
Aye.
Mr. Hartman,
Yes.
Mr. Beatty,
Yes.
Mr. Ailes. Yes. Okay. What I realize is I didn't bring up anything about the bonding. There are 2 bonding motions. I know we heard about these extensively. I would just remind the Board of Finance before we take the votes that the amount we talked about is $3,885,391. For the public, just a reminder that this is including the Guilford High School replacement tennis courts at $738,120, the Baldwin Middle School kitchen renovations, $1,520,534, Cox Library renovations, $82,416, The Guilford Lakes Playground, District Playground, $325,380. 595 New England, that's the renovations into offices of the former science wing, that is $993,888. And future design of projects, architectural and engineering, for an amount of $225,053. With that reminder, I would entertain a motion to approve the 2022-23 Board of Education bonding request of $3,885,391 to be forwarded to bond counsel.
So moved.
Second.
Further discussion?
If I could just say, if I could.
Go
just-
ahead, Jeff, please.
Yeah, I think that these are all worthwhile projects. I mean, the science wing has been something that we've all been discussing in a variety of ways for a number of years. Getting that renovation completed and centralizing the administration would be a good thing. And then we can have a debate down the road about what we do with the Lathrop House. The renovation of the Baldwin Middle School kitchen, again, that's another project that has been delayed or deferred for a long time. And I think it's money well spent to keep that building in good operation. The tennis courts, as we've talked about, get a tremendous amount of use and have been largely, other than cosmetic and essential repairs, untouched for in excess of 25 years. And I've forgotten what the other one, the district-wide
Playground.
the district-wide playground is something that is used by, as it says, students from across the district. The Lakes School has a large district-wide preschool program that will get a lot of use. And so I think that's money well spent as well. So for those reasons, I think all the requested capital improvements or capital bonding issues have merit and should be supported and voted in favor of by this board and the members of the town.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please.
just a quick comment. I'm in favor, I agree, but I'd like to just point out, at least for the record, that it's advantageous at the moment. It's good use of taxpayers' money because the rates are low. But Guilford residents are the most highly indebted on a per capita basis among our peer group. So I'd just like to say that things may change in terms of interest rates, and we may wish to consider moving more toward different ways of funding for capital spending
Understood.
in the future. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you. Somewhat, I guess, along the same vein, I almost forgot that Mr. Trotta did provide a comment regarding bonding. I will read this into record. Again, Mr. Trotta's words. I am extremely concerned about bonding. For several years, I have consistently asked that the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education govern the pace of bonded capital projects. I have not often taken issue with a specific project. My concern here is that the taxpayer has gotten used to a much higher budget debt ratio post Guilford High School funding. I do not want that level of debt to become a new normal, and am hopeful in the absence of an extremely large investment like another school replacement or rehab that the debt ratios return to the pre-high school purchase levels. End comment. It will be a while before we get to that point, but I think it was probably the most significant and best investment this town ever made. So I, would only say to that regarding our debt, it might be higher, and I do agree that it is. It is coming down. We are on that we passed that precipice, and as it comes down, I think, and it equalizes, we are not going to have projects like this anytime in the future, near future anyway, largely because of the way we're taking care of all of our other schools. And I want to make that very clear that that's what the bonding of these projects are, is to not have another major school project. So that would be my only discussion point on that. We have a motion, we have a second. Therefore, I would like to, again, call the question. I will just stick in the same order for ease of my eyes. Ms. Wallace.
Aye.
Ms. Earls.
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, Mr. Hartman,
Aye.
Mr. Beatty,
Aye.
Mr. Ailes, aye. Okay. On Tuesday night, we heard one more bond question or request that will be coming from the town. Correct me on any of this if I'm wrong when I call the question, but we did hear about the land acquisition fund that would be basically refunded, not refunded, well, refunded, put more money into a bond to be able to utilize, as our first selectman had indicated, as needed. I think the last one, as you said, was it 20 years ago? I forgot exactly when it was, but it was a long time ago, and it was a $5 million bond that we have finally expended or close to expending. So this is just replenishing. That's the word I was trying to look for before, replenishing. Therefore, I would entertain a motion to approve the 2022-23 town bonding request of $10 million for the land acquisition fund to be forwarded to the bond council.
So moved.
Second.
Further discussion.
I just had a quick question. Mr. First Selectman, can you talk about the discussion your board had regarding the land acquisition? Was the first or the initial request 15 million and you went down to 10 million? Was there?
That's
ahead.
correct, Veronica. That's correct, Veronica. We, the first request was originally 15. There are some numbers that suggest that, 22 years ago when we put this together, now equates to closer to 15 in terms of land value appreciation over that time. But the board was not comfortable going quite that high. We felt it took us 22 years to spend 5 million. It may take us another 22 years to spend 10 million. And if 10 million isn't enough, then we'll come back to this board to authorize additional money.
Thank you.
Great. Anything further? Okay, otherwise I will go ahead and call the question in the same order. Ms. Wallace,
Aye.
Ms. Earls,
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon,
Hi.
Mr. Hartman,
Yes.
Mr. Beatty,
Aye.
Mr. Ailes, aye. I think that does it. I don't think we have any more motions. And I'm sure if we did, someone would correct me. I believe that is the end of agenda item number 2. Assuming it is after all these votes, we'll go on to agenda item number 3, which is public forum. Again, I will go ahead and ask at this time if anyone wishing to address the Board of Finance regarding the budgets, anything that's gone on over the last 2 nights of deliberation and presentations, raise your virtual hand. We will unmute you, state your name, address, and limit the comments to no more than 3 minutes if possible. Is anybody wishing to address the Board of Finance in public forum? I do see, yes. Barb Hargraves. I said your name, but if you'd like to say it again with an address, that would be fantastic.
That's okay. Barbara Hargraves, I'm at 284 Landon's Way, and I just want to say quickly, thank you to all of you involved. I've been tuning into these meetings, and I just appreciate all the time and questioning and the suggestions that you're making. And thank you very much for passing the budget tonight. I appreciate it as a resident. Thank you.
Sorry, I had to go on mute there. I had another noise downstairs. So anybody else wishing to address the Board of Finance in public forum? Nobody else. Okay. So I will conclude with a couple of logistical housekeeping comments. Obviously, with the fact that we went to vote tonight and made our approved motions on the budgets and the bonding requests. There will be no meeting required for Monday night. So Monday, March 14th will not be needed for budget workshop number 2. I can't, again, it's been said numerous times, I can't thank again on behalf of the board, all of the work that both the Board of Education, Board of Selectmen, department heads, commissions, town school administration, staff, and literally it's the appreciation, as we all know, of hundreds of volunteers that put their effort into this, working on these budgets. I do truly believe that this is a game changer in terms of budgets and is going to allow a lot of things to happen in this town to make it even better. So last item, a reminder that we have basically moved on these bonding requests and the town and well, the town budget, both the expenditure budget and the revenue budget to the town annual budget meeting will be on Tuesday, April 5th, in person at 7:30 in the evening at the community center. And then that will move or should move the budget referendum, town budget referendum to be on Tuesday, April 12th. And unless I'm mistaken, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. the polling places will be open. It'll be all polling places, I believe. So I'm sure, again, I would be corrected on that, but that will be the standard. We are back in standard operating practice in terms of being in person for the budget meeting and budget referendum. So that's great news. Anybody else have any further comments before we entertain a motion to adjourn? Okay. Therefore, thank you, everybody. Thank you, colleagues on the Board of Finance. We'll see you in a few short days because we'll have our regular meeting on Monday, March 21st. But with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
So
moved.
moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good
Thank
night,
you all.
everyone.
Thank you all
Good
for
night.
participating as well.
Thank you all.
Thank
Good
you.
night for now.
Thank you.